fucking 37?
Going to class.
Oh my god. 37. My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks.
In a row?
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Back in My Day. This episode we are going to look at the quintessential indie film, a film that has a very special place in my heart and certainly in my life, and a film that really set the indie scene alight back in 1994 when it was released.
Fuck! I'm not even supposed to be here today.
Of course, we're talking about the 1994 classic Clerks. This black and white homage to working in retail has become almost, a Bible for those working in the service industry. It inspired lots of films in itself, and it launched the career of Kevin Smith.
Clerks, that's the word I say every day of my life and have since 1994 because it changed my entire life. I made this movie called Clerks. That's why we're having this conversation.
This is the first of the Kevin Smith films. I love them all. Yep, even Jersey Girl. And it was a film that made you realise it delivered what Hollywood wasn't delivering at that point, which was clever, quirky, down-to-earth conversations. And it was done at such a great cost. It really did, set the world on fire, especially from a filmmaking standpoint at that point of view. Ironically for me, it's got a personal place in my heart. Certainly it is in my top 10 films ever. But it wasn't the first Smith film that I saw. That honour actually falls to Miramax, which I caught on BBC Two late night, I think in, it must have been about 1998. That led me on a hunt. Took me about a month and a half to track it down at Virgin Megastore, where I purchased it on VHS after ordering it. The days before the internet, which is a wonderful thing to think of. But it certainly started a love affair for me and Smith and his work. And of course Muse, because you can't love Smith without Muse. If you're looking for a non-biased review, this is certainly not going to be that.
Come on, who pisses you off?
Well, I guess it isn't customers in particular. Maybe just a group of customers.
So Clerks follows the day in the life of a convenience store, effectively, or two clerks in a convenience store. One is Dante, who's there on his day off and plays by the rules. The other is Randall, who really, while he should be there, spends most of his time not being where he should be. It really reflects upon the things that were important to the characters at that point, and Smith says, I said lots of times, it was sort of biographical in some aspects of it as well. It looks at the romantic, it looks at the mundane, it looks at the importance of hockey in a hilarious and superbly written black comedy. It launched the career of Smith, it launched the career of Scott Mosier, and of course it gave the world Jay and Silent Bob.
What's up, baby? What's up, sluts? Shit. What's up, Bob? You're a rude motherfucker, you know that? It's cute as hell.
Which is crazy. But here we are, 30 years later, and Jay and Silent Bob are currently out there right now making another film, so we can't complain, right?
Barrage of stupid questions I get.
What do you mean there's no ice? You mean I gotta drink this coffee hot?
You'd feel a hell of a lot better if you just rip into the occasional customer.
So the central conflict of Clerks it revolves around Dante's internal struggle with his dissatisfaction with life, his dissatisfaction with his personal relationships and his career ambitions. And while he's down in the dumps about all of these things and only sees the negative in it, you've got that counterpoint, which is Randall, he serves as both a comic relief, but also the point of most frustration for Dante throughout the entire film.
So I'm no more responsible for my decisions here than, say, a death squad soldier in Bosnia?
Oh, no, that's stretching it. You're not being asked to slay children or anything.
Yeah, not yet.
And I remember one time in his life, I'm gonna freak out.
For me, it brilliantly represents the duality of anybody who's ever worked in retail. The person you have to be to keep your job and the person you want to be. Or the person you would become if you won the lottery and you had to go into work the next day. The tone, it's raw, it's irreverent, it's conversational. The dialogue is so fast-paced and it's filled with humour. And it is certainly one of those films, watching it back 30 years after its release, and certainly the first time I've watched it in about 4 or 5 years, I have it. It's crazy to me that this film is 30 years old. I'm looking at the 15th anniversary Blu-ray. I've got a pile of DVDs behind me, and Clerks X, the 10-year anniversary edition is in there as well. And it's crazy that this film has reached that 30-year milestone. But it's brilliant even now. The conversations that they have, the pop culture references, those sorts of things, really was something that Hollywood wasn't delivering at that point.
They built another Death Star, right?
Yeah.
Now, the first one was completed and fully operational before the rebels destroyed it.
Luke blew it up. Give credit where credit's due.
And the second one was still being built when they blew it up.
Compliments of Lando Calrissian.
Something just never sat right with me that second time around. I could never put my finger on it, but something just wasn't right.
And it sort of captured that zeitgeist that was present at that time. It showed that you didn't need big Hollywood blockbusters to make a film. And the fact that the script was so well written and so well delivered actually overcomes what was effectively, and has to this point been, the hardest point when I've introduced people to this film. The black and white and stillness of the way it is shot. And that was all obviously down to its ultra low budget. But actually, all of that grittiness pulls it together and adds heart to what is a fantastic film. As I said, this film did launch the career of Kevin Smith, setting a new standard for independent filmmakers. In the 90s, it really helped define the DIY spirit of indie filmmaking. You know, this idea that instead of trying to go to Hollywood and do something, or just get a camera and do it yourself and see what you can create for yourself. Smith's done very well out of that. Arguably, it created the most important shared universe, or certainly the first shared universe, way before Marvel was doing that thing, where, we got the Vuascu universe, which is that series of interconnected films. I think we're at 14 now. It's a wonderful thing, and Smith's managed to bring all of that from this one quintessential, hour and 25-minute film that captured a moment in time in a convenience store in New Jersey.
Hey, let me borrow your car.
I don't want to talk to you.
Fine, just let me borrow your car.
Why should I loan you my car?
I want to rent a movie.
You want to rent a movie?
I want to rent a movie. What's that for?
You work in a video store.
I work in a shitty video store.
The indie scene at that point was really flourishing anyway. You had Tarantino coming through, you had Linklater coming through, Rodriguez was gaining attention, and Clerks just suddenly fit into that. And the difference was that, all the three filmmakers that I've mentioned, they were working with significant budgets. Smith went off to film school. He was going to go and try and make it. He went off to film school, and then realised that actually he'd be better spending that money making a film. So that's what he did. He flew home. He worked in the convenience store overnight. There's a whole thing that explains why the shutters are down, that there's gum stuck in the shutters. And actually, it came down to the fact that Smith was filming in this convenience store that he was working in during the day. He was filming there overnight, and then he was back to working in the mornings. He was basically sleeping there for the production of this film, the 27-day production of this film. All of that adds to the weight and almost the mythology, I suppose, of what goes with Clerks. And it fit right into this wave of independent films. It had crude humour that Hollywood was terrified of. It had the offbeat sensibilities. It was a huge success at the Sundance Film Festival. And Miramax, which at that point was, firing out these brilliant films, captured it, and they decided to run with it. It was clever, it was irreverent, and it was of its time. And even now, you go back and watch it these 30 years later, and it's still funny. It still will make you laugh out loud.
Hey, try not to suck any dick on the way through the parking lot. Hey, you, get back here.
I think what Clerks really brought to the table, and I've said this already, was that conversational tone, was this idea that you could have characters who could have conversations that didn't feel like they were part of the story, but still made you attached to those characters. And there's so many references to Star Wars in this. There's a whole conversation about contractors in Star Wars that is brilliant, even now is funny and clever. There's the relationship conversations. There's 37. What they did was they managed to bring, or Kevin Smith managed to bring out through his writing, again, this thing that Hollywood was missing, and it really played into. From that point forward, it changed the way almost that film producers were thinking. They started to see that actually we could represent Generation X in a different way. We could bring those conversations into different things. It arguably, could you say that, the Big Bang Theory and things like that found their place decades later because of the ball that Kevin Smith started rolling with Clerks?
Worth it!
It's certainly a touchstone picture for anybody navigating their 20s. And again, the dialogue is still quoted today. And I know that my friends, the people that I know, we laugh about the 37 conversation, but I also know that has been mentioned and crossed over into lots of other things as well. So it's quite clever to see the impact that Clerks has actually had on the next generation of film and TV makers.
Hear the barrage of stupid questions I get.
What do you mean there's no ice? You mean I gotta drink this coffee hot?
So how much is this thing anyway?
Do you sell hubcaps for a 72 Pinto hatchback? Ooh, mini truck amazing.
You know, it was significant in its impact on the film industry. It proved that you didn't have to spend large sums of money in order to make films. $27,575 was a production cost, and Smith raised that through credit cards effectively. As I said, it made nearly $4 million worldwide, and it really did just encourage filmmakers to pursue their passion projects, and allowed people to have this opportunity, this belief in themselves that they could actually go and do that, because if Kevin Smith did this, then I can go and do this as well. You know, it didn't win the awards, and I was listening to an interview recently with Quentin Tarantino where he talked about being in the higher echelon of filmmakers, and he won, you know, competing for Oscars and stuff like that, and Kevin Smith's never done that. You know, Chasing Amy was his glimpse into that world, but he's never wanted that, and that's what I found about him as a filmmaker, is that he's always pursued something different. He's wanted to make films that he's wanted to watch, and films that have been significant to him at the points that he's been in his life. Clerks, as I said, it won the Filmmakers Trophy at the Sundance. It won the award of Youth at the Cannes Film Festival, and it was nominated for Spirit Awards, including Best First Feature. But that critically was probably one of the more successful films that Smith managed to bring out. So, as I said before, Clerks famously shot the film in the convenience store he was working at. You can still go to the convenience store in New Jersey. It's a pilgrimage. It's quite funny because if you go, there tends to be those sort of Kevin Smith fans. We have a look. Apparently we're there. You can go, and there's invariably that sort of pattern of people going through there. I don't know if you can see, there's a Zippo lighter on my shelf behind me that I purchased from the Quick Stop many years ago. The entire production was completed in 21 days, with many of the cast being Smith's friends or local actors. He went out, did open auditions. He wrote parts specifically for people. Originally, he was looking at himself becoming as playing the role of Randall, which is why Randall has all the best lines in the film. But he realised with working, with directing first time, that he probably didn't have the space or the capacity to do that. So he chose to take a step back. He became Silent Bob, and I'm sure to this point in his life, he'll tell you that was a terrible thing for him, and it's certainly not created a career for him in itself. The film was shot in black and white simply because of lighting. Kevin Smith talked about it recently. He said that they would have needed an expensive lighting package in order to counter the fluorescent lights of the store. So what they did was they just thought, well, let's shoot in black and white, because if we shoot in black and white, we're not going to have issues with greens or colours coming through. And as I said before, he funded it through credit cards. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody, you know, because that is a big gamble. But he did fund it through his credit cards.
I'm not even supposed to be here today! Oh, fuck you!
A huge part of the film was the performances of Brian O'Halloran and Jeff Anderson, so Dante and Randall. Two first-time actors, effectively, relatively unknown. They'd done local theatre and they'd done little bits, but they were fantastic in bringing those characters to life, you know. And I'm sure that neither of them would begrudge playing these characters over and over and over again.
I'm Jay, and this is my head with life mate, Silent Bob!
What can I say? From a technical standpoint, you know, it's black and white, cinematography, and they were choices that were made because it was a cost-saving exercise. I could get all artistic and talk about and discuss the lack of colour emphasises the mundane nature of the characters' lives and adds a documentary feel. But the truth about it is, Smith would tell you that he shot it that way because that's what they could afford to shoot. It was shot at night. They had a fluorescent light in. There was loads of different, you know, issues with it. But actually, I think filming the way they did it actually saved the film as well, because if it had gone to a studio, if a studio picked that up, the crude nature of it, some of those conversations would have been pulled out. They would have changed the direction of the film, and we would have effectively ended up with Waiting, you know, the Ryan Reynolds and Justin Long movie, which isn't a bad movie. Pretty sure it was inspired by Clerks, actually. But it would have just lost those elements of comedy, and it would have just ended up being this sort of, almost romantic comedy. They would have spun it in a different way. The limitations of the film is what made the film so much better, and what made the film stand out for me. It was fantastic because of those things. And this idea that even the camera work in it is really, really static, and they'll tell you that David Klein's now off doing The Mandalorian and doing major Hollywood pictures and True Blood, and does these beautiful films. Red State, I think he worked on with Kevin Smith, which is visually a stunning film. But through all of that, the cameras were set the way they were because they were young. Right, they were figuring things out as they went. They were working on their idea of what Hollywood would be, and they didn't have the experience. But it works. That's what makes it and gives the film the heart that it has.
Didn't get me talked into anything.
Why do you say that?
Well, like you said, she snowballed him.
Sylvan? No, I snowballed him.
Yeah, right.
I'm serious.
I've talked about it before, that the two characters are juxtaposed to each other in that Dante feels that he has to be responsible. He is sometimes led astray by Randall, but he has that air of responsibility about him. He needs to be the way he needs to be in order to keep his job, as opposed to Randall, who's very much there because he's got nowhere better to be. And even then, throughout the film, you see that he sometimes has better places to be, and so off he goes. What's great about the film, and what I love about the film, is the fact that Randall should probably have some form of effigy in every staff room in retail throughout the world, because Randall should truly be the patron saint of retail, because he delivers what I know from my experience working in retail for many years, what he wanted to say to customers and what he wanted to do to customers, things that probably wouldn't be allowed and shouldn't be done, as opposed to Dante, who is the quintessential customer service person, the yes ma'am, the no ma'am idea. It captures these ideas of change. Randall's afraid. He has this whole conversation about times where he was a child and it was an opportunity to, I think the phrase he uses is shit or get off the pot, and he couldn't make those choices, and it's reflected in this film where he can't make those choices, often relying on Randall or those decisions to be made for him. And I think that reflects probably the frustration that certainly Gen X had at the time, that people felt at the time, as they were sort of adjusting to a world where they didn't know how they fit exactly.
That article's accurate. Caitlin really is getting married.
You know what I just watched?
Me pulling a can off some moron's fist?
As the film goes through it, we really do see character development in Dante especially. He undergoes this significant internal development through the film. At first he's very passive and unwilling to take charge of his life, and he's blaming others for his problem. By the end he sort of reaches a point where he's willing to make his own decisions and confront things head on. Even if he starts to question his own unhappiness, culminating in him taking a stand, and even if it is against the wrong person. Meanwhile, Randall, on the other hand, remains relatively unchanged, embodying the slacker archetype who resists any responsibility. And then the films that followed this, Clerks 2 and Clerks 3, pretty much you see Randall not develop until late in Clerks 3 in that responsibility.
Are either one of these any good?
I don't watch movies.
Well, have you heard anything about either one of them?
I find it's best to stay out of other people's affairs.
Certainly, if you've ever worked in retail, Clerks is a film you need to watch, because it'll make you laugh about those customers. And we've all had those customers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But we all knew the types. Doesn't matter what type of retail you worked in, we all knew the types that would come in. They would ask the wrong questions, or they would ask the same questions over and over again. And you can really feel that through the performances of the characters here. Is Kevin Smith, when it comes to direction, is Kevin Smith Steven Spielberg? No. Has he achieved that 30 years later? No. But what he's done is he's taken well-crafted pieces, and Clerks is raw. But it's his first taste. He gets performances and smoothness and even slickness each of the cast members' delivery, and that's where the real credit needs to come, because the script is so fast, so witty, so well delivered. that actually, you look at the performances in this film and they are outstanding. You know, their ability to relate to the material and to deliver the material in the way that they do. And it is, you know, I remember watching it and thinking, wow, do people speak like that? And while that could be a criticism of it, that sometimes it does, and that would be my only criticism, sound like everybody's speaking from the same head, which of course they were, because Smith wrote the script. What it delivers is this brilliant spoken word piece, effectively, you know, something that it's just got a specialness about it, and that from a director standpoint, he really does get those performances out of those actors. And when you consider that they were filming in the middle of the night, that is credit in itself to what they were able to achieve and what Smith was able to achieve. And it's a real standout achievement for a first-time director, and it does show his love of great storytelling, but also of knowing the material so well that he knew what he wanted to get out of it. You know, one of the most expensive things about the whole film is actually the soundtrack. Smith talked about how he managed to, you know, get Alice in Chains and Soul Asylum, Bad Religion, and some of these big bands on there, but he actually spent nearly $8,000 of a $27,000 budget or $28,000 budget on music. So he spent, I think it was about 20% of his budget on music alone.
You're late.
What the hell are you doing here? I thought you were playing hockey at one.
The boss called. Arthur fell ill.
Why the shutters closed?
Someone jammed gum in the locks.
Bunch of savages in this town.
So there's a fantastic line, the only line of dialogue that Silent Bob delivers in the whole film, and it was originally meant to be delivered by Jay. Jay couldn't get it right, so Smith just said, I'll do it. And that's now become a whole thing with Silent Bob, his ability to deliver these key points. But the line is delivered, and it's brilliantly reflective of current Hollywood fare. You know, he says, there's a million fine-looking girls in the world, but how many of them bring you lasagna at work? And for me, the biggest issue with current Hollywood is exactly that. There's a million fine-looking films out there, but how many of them deliver a great story too, and great performances to go with it? Clerks does that. It isn't the best looking film, right? It is a hard watch for somebody. I have tried to make my wife watch this film. She's seen Clerks 2, she's seen Clerks 3, and she thinks they're funny in their way. But trying to get her to watch Clerks 1 is hard because it's so static and it's black and white. I remember watching it with my father, which must have been 25 years ago, and him being like, I don't get it, I'm not watching this. It's a hard watch sometimes because it's so static, and that has been, every time I've brought people to this film, that has been the hard part. Once you get through that, what you're getting is a really, really good story. You're getting brilliant delivery, very clever lines. And as I said, that's something that Hollywood lacks in a big way these days, is great stories. Once you get through that first 10 minutes, you forget it's black and white. And I've been to the Quick Stop, as I said, you're not missing much. You really don't need to see the colours of a convenience store. Clerks is the film that brings you, you know, it's lasagna in itself. It's warm, it's funny, it's an irreverent look at life when you're stuck. It was made by a man who loves films. The pop culture references remain as clever today as they were 30 years ago. The characters are timeless. Yes, video stores don't exist anymore. I wish they would. But the conversations had by many and still had in cinemas today and living rooms around the world, right? I'm thinking about the Navy SEALs comment in particular. You know, you sit there on a Saturday night and you're trying to find that film and you have those conversations. It's brilliant because from a former Blockbuster employee, those were the conversations people were having. And Smith brought that level of realism to it. As I said, if I was to find a criticism, it is that sometimes the voices in the film all sound the same. But otherwise, this is a fantastic film. The way it's shot, you know, represents its inexperience, its lack of budget. As I said, Klein is now making some beautiful stuff and is a top-class cinematographer. But all that does is actually allow you to listen to this beautifully crafted script. It's almost poetic, the back and forths, and to feel the rawness and appreciate the jokes. You needed that. Almost you needed to not be thrown all of these colours and all of this brilliance. As I said, some may find it a challenge, but I urge you to watch it. If you haven't, because it is absolutely brilliant, Smith is now onto his 15th film in his 30-year career, and if there's one thing he can write, it is a memorable line, and Clerks has many. You can catch Clerks on Sky Classics, on Now TV, and everywhere you can buy anything in digital these days, and you can probably pick it up on DVD somewhere as well. But I urge you, if you've ever worked in retail, go and watch Clerks. And if you really want to reflect on some proper 90s nostalgia, Clerks is the film for you.